Hi, so this video is going to talk pretty extensively about rape. If that is the subject that is triggering for you, this is probably not the video for you. Life is hard enough as it is right now. Like, please take care of yourself. Which, like Said, no, not everything's about you. Statistically, Ronaldo is actually the most likely person to have killed her. They call her fluids cream a whole bunch, which I don't like. And I think perhaps she should get checked out for that one. They're always making Harry Styles kind of a dick.
Alexi's online.
Hi, Lexi here. Welcome back to my channel where I say them about stuff on the internet and worry that I'm going to sound like one of those men I cover that's like, well, I'm gonna bring some nuance to this situation today. When really, I only ever have pettiness in my heart, to be honest. Haunting Adeline. So I feel like conversations about Haunting Adeline and just like generally dark romance come up every so often, and the reason that people are remembering that this book and I guess genre generally exists is because of this announcement by the author.
Haunting Adeline's getting a movie. I thought really long and hard about how I'm gonna break this news to you guys, and I decided to just be myself, so Haunting Adeline's getting a movie. I already know. But Hot Daddy Carlton, you said you were gonna sell the film rights for Haunting Adeline. But Hot Daddy Carlton, you said you wanted it to be a TV show. So why, Hot Daddy Carlton, is it a movie and not a TV show? I'm happy to answer those questions for you. In my defense, I never thought that I would meet someone from Hollywood that is basically the male version of myself and just as insane as me. But I did. So with that said, my co-executive producer, Courtney, and I are super close. I've already informed him that if he works on anything else without me, it's considered cheating. Just kidding. Not really. No, but seriously, I'm not being serious, but this is our baby. I am 1,000% involved in this. At this point, I'm more like a co-director with him, and he's my business partner. He is just as invested as I am in this adaptation and keeping it as close to humanly possible to source material. So I want to stress to you, all my loves, that I am so involved in this. I have a say in everything. I mean, the script, the casting, the music, the set design, anything and everything that goes into this film, I have a say in. This is a partnership, and he is very well aware that in order to bring this book to film and actually keep it true to the book, he cannot do it without me, just like I can't do it without him. As for why it's a movie and not a TV show, as much as we both would love for it to be a TV show, there is not, at this current time, a streaming service or network that exists that will platform the TV show without sticking their fingers in it and trying to take things down, cut things out, and chop it up into pieces on what they think it should look like and, you know, what they want it to be. And that is just not something that Courtney and I are willing to do. So a movie, it has to be.
So what the heck is Haunting Adeline, you might ask? Well, it is a dark romance book that involves Adeline, Addie for short, who is an author, getting stalked by this guy, Zaid, and him repeatedly raping her. But then she falls in love with him, so it's all fine. There's like B and C plots as well. I'll get into that later, okay? Because I did read the whole book. I did do that. By the way, in this video, I will be using like YouTube speak for everything because I don't want to go in and edit out every single time I say rape. So I will be saying R or PDF file or that kind of thing, which I don't like doing, but that's the situation that we are in. I feel like people were low-key upset with like how H.D. Carlton, the author of Haunting Adeline, made this announcement because it was sort of jokey, and also she was kind of talking about like, oh, I finally met like the male version of me, a guy who's like unhinged as I am. And I don't really want to veer into the kind of weird gender essentialist, like men can't write and direct stories where the main audience is women, because I think when we get into like this gender can do things and this gender can't do things, we can get pretty transphobic pretty quickly. And if H.D. Carlton trusts him to be the one co-directing this project, that's honestly what matters. But, you know, I do agree that I kind of get icked out by this language. I do get that. On the one hand, I actually do think that having to preface the fact that your work is kind of fucked up and you are taking that seriously every time you talk about your book is kind of a lot to expect and maybe not the most fair, especially if your audience like already knows that. On the other hand, I suspect that H.D. Carlton suspected that this video would reach a much wider circle than her usual audience, and I really think that maybe a follow-up video of like, hey, I know I'm not going to convince people that don't think this story should be a movie or even that this story should exist in the first place, that making a movie is okay, but I do want to acknowledge concerns that the director and I will not handle this overall topic sensitively, because obviously the things Zaid does in the story would not be okay in real life, and this movie is bringing Zaid's actions to an even wider audience. And I think this does come up a lot for me, right, where H.D. Carlton has a very all or nothing mentality, from what I've seen at least, about people voicing concerns about how R is depicted in her book. Like, it's either you're a hater and you don't get it and you're silencing survivors, or you understand that this is dark romance, and I think perhaps there is some space between that. And to be clear, I'm actually not all that anti-dark romance. I come from fanfic spaces, and I've talked before on this channel about how I think that NBC Hannibal is dark romance by today's standards. Like, evil guy does evil stuff to love interest and seduces love interest into indulging their morally gray nature, and I love NBC Hannibal. There were no hinges on any of those doors by the end. Like, what do you mean by the end of the show the episode titles were verses from Revelations? Like, who, what? Where was I again? So I'm not anti-dark romance. And at the same time, I think that as dark romance becomes more mainstream, maybe it would be nice if authors took a bit more responsibility for how they talk about things outside of their work. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself a little bit here, because what if I summarized the book with a little more detail for you guys? Because I did take my 4 to 5 days reading it. Also, if you hear any weird noises in the background, that is my very old dog. He is very clingy and very sleepy all the time. And my very old dog would not blame dark romance for the rising misogyny in America. I mean, he is a dog, but yeah, basically this girl, Adeline, Addie for short, she's an author, and she's moved into her grandma's old house in the woods outside of Seattle. And since it's like a fancy old Gothic mansion, it has a name and everything, Parsons Manor. It was built by her great-grandma, Gigi. Now, at a book signing event, this guy Zaid sees her and becomes obsessed with her. Technically, at first we just know him as like the shadow for a good portion of the book, because the chapters are from alternating points of view, and his like chapter marker is the shadow and hers is the manipulator, because she sees herself as like manipulating people's emotions with her stories or something. Anyways, Zaid starts stalking Addie. That's the A plot of this book, okay? Zaid breaking into Addie's house or showing up wherever she is, and within the context of the book, fully R-ing her. Like, the first sex scene involves a gun going places. A gun should probably not go, but Addie's turned on by fear, so it's fine actually. It's all fine. Zaid also gets violent towards other men that she hooks up with. He kills one and sends the guy's hands to her, but actually, it's okay, because the guy was an abuser. The B plot of this book is that Zaid is a hacker and also an assassin who runs an organization called Z that tracks down and kills sex traffickers of women and children. So I guess if you're a man being sex trafficked, you're out of luck. Zaid's primary targets right now are a couple of congressmen who were in a leaked video doing child sacrifice and drinking said child's blood in dark robes. This was written and published before the files, by the way. Yeah. So basically the B plot of this book is Zaid killing arists. Make it make sense. Addie's friend Dea also works for Z, but she doesn't know Zaid is the head of Z for most of the book because he's all mysterious or whatever. There's a C plot to this book. The C plot is that Addie finds a bunch of diaries hidden in the walls. They were written by her great-grandmother, Gigi, who also had a stalker named Ronaldo, whom she fell in love with. Gigi was murdered, and that murder was never solved. So while all this is happening, Addie is also trying to solve Gigi's murder with the help of Dea. At first, Addie thinks that Ronaldo did it, and Zaid is like, you just want Gigi's stalker to have done the murdering to prove that I'm dangerous, which, like, Zaid, no, not everything's about you. Statistically, Ronaldo is actually the most likely person to have killed her. Then for a while, it seems like Gigi's husband did it because he had some addiction and anger problems. but in the end it turns out that their friend Frank, who was the police chief at the time and actually the father of the main senator target right now, Mark Steinberg, did it because he was mad that Gigi was having an affair and therefore ruining his friendship with her and her husband. One of many things in this book that did not make a lot of sense to me, actually. So with all of that in mind, what do you think is a popular romance trope that turns up in this Darkstalker romance? Is it A, there was only one bed, B, fake dating, or C, misunderstandings/miscommunications? I'll even learn how to use that YouTube quiz feature for this, guys. That's how serious I am. If you chose B, fake dating, you'd be correct. Zaid has infiltrated the senator group and is becoming friends with them. But he runs into Mark while out stalking Addie at a restaurant, and he's worried that Mark will try to kidnap Addie because she's just so hot. So he's like, okay, I need to make sure Mark knows that I own her. So he does that by being like, oh yeah, we're dating, and Addie, who has no information or context other than, oh, my stalker is telling this random senator that's randomly just out and about that we're dating, just yes-ands him and goes along with it. And then they keep having to go to events that Mark is throwing because he has info on Gigi that Addie wants, and Zaid wants to stay on his good side to bust the PDF file ring that Mark is helping operate. The book ends with the trafficking ring luring Addie out of her house and kidnapping her, and it turning out that the videos of the senators sacrificing and drinking the blood of children being leaked on the dark web was leaked on purpose. So by the time Zaid and his team start disrupting another ritual thingy, they realize too late that it was all part of a setup. The book ends on a cliffhanger, but I did start the second book, and I think that Zaid gets away and spends most of the book trying to find and free Addie from Essual slavery because only he gets to assault her, goddammit. And also, it turns out that Mark's wife, Claire, is actually running the whole operation, but I did not read enough of Hunting Adeline, which is the sequel, because I'd rather be reading gay fanfiction. Haunting Adeline and Hunting Adeline are called the cat and mouse duet, and Zane keeps calling Addie Little Mouse, and then she, for a little bit, starts calling him Kitty Cat, and all I could think of was Miraculous Ladybug, which was not ideal, actually. So the book is obviously quite controversial because it fundamentally revolves around a woman falling in love with her stalker/repeated artist. H.D. Carlton also makes it clear that Zaid and Addie's relationship isn't consensual non-consent, CNC, but dubcon/non-con, which are terms that originate from fanfiction communities and are short for dubious consent and non-consent, respectively. So basically, if we're talking about two characters, in dubcon, character A might be engaging with stuff with character B, and character B doesn't explicitly consent to it but is into it. And if we're talking about non-con, character A might be engaging in stuff with character B despite character B stating that they don't consent. This is like an oversimplification, and it's also really worth noting that in real life, dubcon, not a thing. Consent must be clearly, enthusiastically, and soberly given for it to be consent. H.D. Carlton says that Haunting Adeline contains dubcon/non-con in both the trigger warnings at the beginning of the book and on Q&A highlights on her Instagram. Now, an argument I see being made online is that this book teaches readers that R is okay as long as the guy who does it is hot, maybe, and I do have complicated feelings towards that, actually. Let's start off with the idea that men who read it will be more likely to R women because Addie falls in love with Zaid after he repeatedly R's her in the book. Also, she secretly likes it. We'll get into that as well. While there is some evidence that violent porn might influence men who view it to be more violent during sex, most of the data we have on that is from visual porn. Haunting Adeline is written erotica and its primary audience is women. While I do have a lot of problems with Haunting Adeline and how H.D. Carlton handles criticism, I do actually agree with what she says in this video.
And for those who say that this movie is going to cause men to assault women, anything will cause a man to assault a woman. A bad date will. The World Cup will. That's why they've been doing it since the dawn of humanity. and no one and nothing is to blame for a man harming a woman except the man.
She is right. It is really shitty to blame her for what would ultimately be a hypothetical man's hypothetical actions. Now let's talk about women. So a book I read for my senior thesis that I did on Allie Hazelwood's The Love Hypothesis was Dangerous Men and Adventurous Women, and it was a collection of essays about romance authors and readers and kind of feminism. A couple of essays talked about something that resonated with me, which is the idea that there's often this assumption that female readers can't tell the difference between a book and real life. So using The Love Hypothesis as an example, Olive, who used to be Rey from Star Wars, this book used to be Star Wars sequel trilogy fanfiction, is a grad student at Stanford, and she ends up dating Adam, who used to be Kylo Ren, who is a professor in her department. In the book, this would not be against Stanford's policy because he's not her direct supervisor. In real life, it would be against Stanford's policy. But Dangerous Men, Adventurous Women reasons that women who read The Love Hypothesis know that Olive and Adam's relationship is fiction and wouldn't be acceptable in real life, because even if he wasn't her direct supervisor, he would still have power over her. And reading this book isn't going to suddenly make them approve of student-teacher relationships. Now, if we're applying that to Haunting Adeline, I think it's helpful to bring fan fiction back into things. There's this site called Archive of Our Own, and it's probably the most popular fan fiction hosting website right now because Wattpad, which was another really popular one but didn't work very well, low-key banned porn. It was a whole thing a couple of days ago. But anyways, Archive of Our Own has this system called tags where you can basically put tropes and characters and potential trigger warnings that are in your work in this really front and center section. And I read a bit of a different book a while back that was about like fandom and consent that talked about tags functioning as consent between the author and the reader. And I think H.D. Carlton's trigger warnings at the beginning of Haunting Adeline sort of function similarly to tags on AO3. For me, I think of Haunting Adeline as a story where Addie is at no point giving her consent to Zaid, but I also think of it as H.D. Carlton and the reader engaging in a kind of CNC. Carlton is telling the reader what they will experience when reading the book, which is, the book containing non-consent, and the reader is consenting to read that non-consent. Of course, in real life, partners engaging in CNC would ideally have a really long conversation about every part of the scene beforehand, and there would be no surprise gun going in places that guns are really not meant to, or seatbelts being used for things that seatbelts are really not meant to be used for. And if Haunting Adeline was on AO3, all of that would be tagged. Like, my CNC comparison is not one-to-one, but for me, it makes this book and its readership make a bit more sense to me if we think of it as honestly kind of engaging in kink. Also, I wasn't quite sure where to put this, but one of my favorite videos on The Love Hypothesis, which I'll link in the description because I don't remember who made it, I watched it a while ago, talks about the amount of emphasis on Olive's hip bones and how she's smaller than Adam is sort of fetishizing skinniness in a way that feels kind of weird. And that shows up a lot in Haunting Adeline as well. Adeline will not shut up about her flat stomach and how much bigger Zaid is than her, but in a muscly way, to be clear. But then Zaid will talk about her curves, and that just does not make a lot of sense to me put together, to be honest. The fact that heroines that women are supposed to be projecting themselves onto in popular romance books are overwhelmingly skinny isn't a new conversation, and both of these books did come out before the era of Ozempic, so that conversation is different now in some ways, but I do think it's worth mentioning because it was weird. What I do think is a lot more complicated is that very young people, including minors, do have access to this book. It's very, very easy to pirate books online and to access content just generally without parents knowing. I do think that younger people are smarter than we give them credit for when it comes to understanding that books are fiction and not always applicable to real life. That said, something that I worry about is that Zaid's reasoning that Addie secretly likes what he does to her is physical signs of arousal from Addie. They call her fluids cream a whole bunch, which I don't like. And I think perhaps she should get checked out for that one. Yeah, I think she should maybe see a doctor about that. But like, I do think it plays into this really common myth about sexual assault not being sexual assault if the victim was physically aroused. Like, that means they secretly wanted it or something. And that's just actually not how bodies work. Fun fact. Like, sometimes people want to be physically aroused, but can't or aren't for whatever reason. And the same goes for people sometimes being physically aroused even if they do not want to be. Basically, this really awful but common myth about R, that the person secretly wanted it if they are physically aroused, is really used in this book. And I don't think that H.D. Carlton believes that or even intends to, like, spread that belief through Haunting Adeline. But, like, the thing is, she has a whole, like, trigger warning section, right? And she has a hotline for, like, sex trafficking. And I feel like it would be so easy to also add a, like, hey, this is a work of fiction. If a person is unwilling in the real world, that is R. If you are a survivor reading this, it doesn't matter if you were physically aroused or you, like, froze up and weren't able to fight or run away. What happened to you was wrong. Here are some resources. Like, that feels pretty easy to do and also, like, educational for especially young people who might not know that. Although, of course, there are, like, people my age and older who don't know that either. H.D. Carlton has also said on her Instagram that she thinks that Zaid would have stopped if Addie was, like, screaming and crying and, like, really fighting him. What he did was still wrong, but he would have stopped if she was doing that. And honestly, I think that's kind of f***ed as well, actually. Like, H.D. Carlton repeatedly does own up to the fact that Zaid is fully a hypocrite. His job is to save women from stalking and R, and that's what he's doing. And also that Addie is not consenting. She does own up to both of those things on her Instagram. But at the same time, the whole, like, if she was fighting back harder than Zaid actually would have stopped, again, feels like it is perpetuating our culture. And again, I am sure that is not what H.D. Carlton actually meant to be doing, but considering the themes of Haunting Adeline, it would be nice if she felt more responsibility, being a bit more careful with her words. She also replied to a comment on the post that was announcing the debut of the Haunting Adeline graphic novel that expressed concern that maybe, like, a kid would see this and pick it up, not realizing that it was very much not for kids. What you're doing is trying to force all adults to be responsible for complete strangers' kids. I'm not their role model, and the book/movie isn't their instructional manual. Their parents and only their parents are responsible for them, what they consume, and teaching them about morals and fiction versus reality. I can have empathy for children who have neglectful parents while also holding space for my right to create art and understand it's not my fault that they have neglectful parents, nor is it my responsibility to step in and censor myself for them. No adult can bear that weight, or we would all go insane trying to fit ourselves into a perfect box for kids we don't even know exist. All it'd accomplish is adults completely losing our individuality, passions, aspirations, and understanding of who we are outside of this endless, crushing responsibility. Art needs to exist without restraint, otherwise it's no longer art, but carefully controlled and regulated propaganda. Instead of blaming the art for having a negative impact on those who have had their access restricted from it, blame the ones who allowed them to access the art without restriction. Only they are to blame for the impact. Which, you know, I sort of touched on this. Like, ideally, parents would be the only ones in charge of their kids and would be fully control of their online safety. But that's just not how the world works. I've talked a bit about this on my channel before, but at a certain point, I don't really know how to tell people that we should maybe all care about each other and take a little bit more responsibility for each other. I don't really think H.D. Carlton loses that much integrity in her art by adding some resources and some, hey, just double checking that you know that this is wrong at the beginning of her book. She could do some harm reduction. I don't think this is an all or nothing thing. Like, that's my biggest criticism of this book and H.D. Carlton in general. That's actually a lie. I also have the criticism that all of the Mexican characters in this book are part of a trafficking cartel. And I've also been told that Italians don't like that they keep being like typecast as mob members in books, and that definitely happens in Gigi's letters. I'm sorry to Mexican and Italian people catching strays on this one. Okay, speaking of the graphic novel, there have been a lot of AI accusations when it comes to this cover. All 3 artists involved have denied these claims, and at least one of them has a video of them like sketching the art. That said, my immediate thought on seeing this cover art was like, something feels a little off. Now, I have seen people in the comments say that Zaid has a 6th finger. That is actually the fold of Addie's arm, but this rose doesn't really line up. Addie's hair is clipping through her collarbone. Also, they're not actually looking at each other, which comes up a lot in AI art. The cover is definitely rushed. The publisher said that they wanted to get it out as quickly as possible for a variety piece. They have also denied that any AI was used in it. What I will say is that Blackstone book publishers who are distributing the book do use AI in their illustration services. These are some examples on their website for children's books. I also actually fully just called them and was like, hey, I am a new author and I want to commission you for a book cover. Do you use AI? And they said, well, we have AI options and we have human drawn options. Some authors prefer AI, some authors prefer human. And I said, okay, thanks. Oh no, I have another call, and hung up. So if you were that agent, sorry, I don't have a debut fantasy book coming out. As somebody that does art and is friends with a lot of artists, I do feel kind of like gross accusing these artists of using AI to enhance their work, but I don't know, something still doesn't feel right. Maybe it is just because the work was rushed. Like, let me know what you think in the comments down below, especially if you're better at spotting AI than I am. H.D. Carlton herself is pretty anti-AI. She's giving musical artists the opportunity to create pieces for the Haunting Adeline movie, but is asking them to share the entire process and also asking them to post the song on TikTok so that she can confirm that they're not using generative AI in any part of the process. She's also doing open auditions for this side character, Sibby, and saying that people can post their auditions on TikTok. And I have a conspiracy theory. I know that in the past I have said I'm anti-conspiracy theory, but I have a conspiracy theory. There are specific tags for these audition posts, but people have been also adding the general Haunting Adeline tag to their posts. And what if this encouraging / requiring people to post on TikTok is partially to bury posts with the Haunting Adeline tag that criticize Haunting Adeline? Like, genuinely, if I was working in marketing, that would be a thing I would suggest. I can be so much more evil if I worked in marketing. Oh, also, we don't officially know for sure who the co-director is. She refers to him as Courtney, but I'm pretty sure that it's Courtney Solomon, who worked on the After series, which was originally Harry Styles' self-insert fanfiction. So basically like a messy bun on Wattpad girly that is low-key the author writing fanfic of her dating bad boy Harry Styles, who is kind of a dick. They're always making Harry Styles kind of a dick. For some reason, that's just like really funny to me. I've actually only seen After We Collided, which was the second out of those 7 movies that they made, I'm pretty sure. But that's because it was the one that had Dylan Sprouse in it, and he's great, by the way. He really saved that movie. Shout out Trevor. She should have ended up with him. Okay, it is fully tomorrow as of filming, and I didn't like my conclusion, so we're changing it. I think that in some ways, the popularity of dark romance right now is a way for people to kind of push back against the current purity culture in the United States, at least. Like, for example, Alchemized, which was originally Draco X Hermione fanfiction and was marketed as dark romance. I will not let Senlin Yu forget either of those things. That is My Roman Empire is getting a movie, and the debut got to be like 1,000 pages, which I think is so that people didn't hate read it, but I hate myself, so I did. And one of the annoying things about this whole situation is that I do think Senlin Yu has some really interesting things to say about like who gets to tell stories, and sort of that war is more complicated than like the good guys or the bad guys. I don't think that they do it particularly well in this book, but they do have like interesting things to say. But I do think that is subversive in some ways when our current government in the US is very like, rah, war, we're the only ones that are right, victory, nationalism, patriotism. I don't think that a book that used the fact that it used to be fan fiction of a notorious transphobe, racist, anti-Semite, ableist, the list goes on and on, author's work as marketing can necessarily ever be like truly subversive, but I do think that there are themes that push back against like what's currently happening in the United States. But I also think that dark romance can sort of like perpetuate that purity culture. Rose in Chains also used to be Draco X Hermione fanfiction. Probably the video I'm most proud of that I've made on this channel is about Rose in Chains. It contains a lot of homophobia, just randomly. Doesn't need to be in there, but it's in there. Also, the Hermione character in this book is left pretty purposefully racially ambiguous. That's also the case in like the fan art that Senlin Yu reposts, even though in the original fanfiction, she was definitely meant to be black-coded, which is pretty problematic when you consider that in both of these books, Draco Malfoy character is the like white master. Neither of these books were written by black people, by the way. And this one was written by a white woman. So Rose in Chains, I think, even though it is dark romance and in some ways maybe trying to push back against purity culture because of this whole like forbidden taboo stuff, it also definitely plays into a lot of conservative stuff that's happening in our society these days. And also, like, it can get really weird. I know recently this girl that's writing a Nazi ex-Jewish woman concentration camp romance was going viral. Part of why it was going viral actually was that the cover art that she AI generated really looked like Hermione and Draco Malfoy fan art, which I think is maybe just because AI is fed what's popular right now, and a lot of these kind of like Nazi-coded romances right now are Hermione. But then I went on this whole rabbit hole because she's super Christian, the girlie that's writing that book, and also is dedicating it to Nazis low-key. She's Christian, and then I went on this whole like rabbit hole of apparently super Christian people really like to write Nazi romances because like Jewish people represent the perfect victim in that context of like concentration camps, and if the Nazi can be redeemed through Christ, anybody can be redeemed through Christ. And that definitely sort of plays into this like conservative narrative that's happening in, again, the US especially right now. And then of course like dark romance can absolutely go too far. There was this book that was going to come out maybe 2 years ago that was called Daddy's Little Toy, and it was a dark romance between a freshly 18-year-old and her father's friend whom she grew up with. And the guy started noticing her when she was like 3 or something and never ended up actually getting released. The author, this was in Australia, was arrested for CSAM. I think she also maybe dedicated the book to her kids, but that might have just been a rumor. I'm not 100% sure. So it's not like, oh, dark romance like can never go too far, and it never has real world consequences. And it's always subverting like purity culture or whatever. Basically, I read books that were politically worse than Haunting Adeline, in my opinion. And there are dark romance books that certainly do cross a line. I think dark romance being so popular right now is definitely a symptom of the fact that in the US at least, we are living in a very dark time, and we're also living in a time where maybe it's more acceptable to just kind of say whatever. And I think at the end of the day, I genuinely don't know where I stand on Haunting Adeline. I definitely do think that H.D. Carlton has more of a responsibility to choose her words carefully when she's talking about the book in real life. And that kind of sucks, but that's just the case because there's so many myths about our culture that are very easily perpetuated with how we talk about non-con and dub-con. And this also goes for H.D. Carlton's fans as well. Because it sort of was one thing when the only people that were reading this book were people that maybe knew the conventions of non-con and dub-con in fiction, but now there is this larger and often younger audience. And I also think at the same time, there is a moral panic around Haunting Adeline that doesn't acknowledge that women are actually kind of smart when it comes to what they read. And I do think both of those things can be true. The question, of course, of like, should this even be a movie? I don't know how it's going to be a movie because H.D. Carlton doesn't want to cut anything out. And if she didn't, the movie at the very least would be softcore porn. So who would even distribute that? Like, would it even be in theaters? It would definitely be rated R, I would hope. Or would it be like a streaming network release like I think The Love Hypothesis is going to be? I'm not always used to not having a like, I definitely feel this way on this channel. So I'd love to hear what you think in the comments below. Do you read dark romance? Do you write dark romance? Do you hate dark romance? Do you think that Haunting Adeline does cross some sort of line? How do you think dark romance relates to the current culture, TM, especially if you're not from the US? I would love to hear that. Thank you so much for watching. My outro song is Take a Vacation by the Young Vanes, remixed by me, Ghost of Brian Ross, Don't Come For Me, I Swear to God. All channel art is by me. Like, comment, subscribe. I think hyping is still a thing. All of that means a lot to me. Hit that notification bell if you want to be notified every time I post, but really I just post on Sundays mostly, so check back here on Sundays. I also have an Instagram if you want even more access to my life. It is at Alexi'sOnline. Thank you so much again, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye now.